So the title, Map Making, Taking, and Faking, um, is a total lie. This is not what I'm going to talk about. Um, Anytime somebody asks me to do a presentation, I come up with a plausibly general title and abstract so that I can talk about really whatever I want later on without being too penned in. It's a great trick. Always lie. That's the first lesson I have for you. Anyways, all of cartography is a lie anyway, so I'm just so used to it. It's muscle memory. It's reflexive at this point. What I'm really going to talk about is accidental lessons in economic geography, connecting the dots and stuff. And I think it's fun to have titles of presentations that include and stuff. That'll give you a sense for about how formal this presentation will be. This is what you get. This is what you get. These are the ABCs of me. So accidental lessons in economic geography. What the deuce does that even mean? Well, let's take a look. Really, what we're doing in GIS is we're coming up with a little model of the world. We live on this crazy earth, and it's insanely complex, unknowably deep and nuanced. And so we take a little dimension of it and we try to understand that piece of it, and we draw pictures of it, and we model it, and we ask questions about it. And whenever we do that, invariably our understanding broadens a little bit and we can improve our model. And then we take a look at that model and we improve that too. And you get this kind of nice, virtuous, iterative cycle of learning and developing better questions. And you might not be answering questions necessarily, but you're asking better questions. You're asking questions that you wouldn't have thought to ask if you hadn't made a map in the first place. GIS is magic in that way. Ultimately, you've got something maybe that, is really fine. But the finer our model of the world is, the more we realize that there's so much that we just don't know. I'm going to talk about specifically AIS data, so ship tracking data, and how to visualize that and how to think of that. It's just really remarkable stuff. It's breadcrumbs. That's what it is. It's a bunch of lat long points with a timestamp and a name. It's a breadcrumb. And like Hansel and Gretel, you can try to piece these back together and find your way home or track that boat in the ocean. But AIS is fascinating stuff, and really, it's there as a safety mechanism. Vessels have a little transponder, and they ping out, and they broadcast their location, and it says, "Here I am, and this is what time it is." Blip, 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 and they do it because there's a lot of vessels out there. And things are kind of harder to turn in the water, especially these gigantic things that may or may not get stuck sideways in the Suez Canal for some reason. They don't turn fast and easily. So it's good to know where everything is when you're, coming down the pike. And there's just so much of this data, so much data. It's one of those problems where you've got so much data, it's you're inundated. And the issue is it's too big to really manage very easily, especially for certainly for the general public, but even specialists would have a hard time managing this volume of data and making much sense of it. And so if you go to Marine Cadastre, they very generously let you download this. And the file format that they provide it in is a CSV file, which, on my machine by default opens in Excel. It's a table. It's a simple table. And they release one for each day, and they are big. It's a CSV file, but it's almost a gigabyte. And it's, almost 300 gigabytes a year of data of just ship tracking points. Let's take a look at it. So I downloaded one of them, and by default, it'll open in Microsoft Excel like this. And by the way, there's so much data in this one CSV file that Microsoft can't handle it. It'll give you a little warning that says, hey, by the way, I'm only showing you a little bit of everything in this data because I can't read all of these into Excel. There's a limit. So you can't even see all of the data. You can't load it into a tool like Excel and see everything, but we can get a sense for what's there. You've got an ID, you've got a date timestamp, which rules, by the way. Yeah, Laura Lee shared this. Yeah, just over 1 million record limit in Excel. I want 1 billion. I want 1 billion. So we've got lat long there, latitude and longitude, Sog and Cog is interesting stuff. We don't have to get into that kind of thing. But anyways, really interesting content here. Description of the vessel, how big it is, how deep it sinks in this in the water, which actually is really important if you're going to go up and down the Mississippi. So there is this concept called latch for it's an acronym, and there are all kinds of ways for we humans to try to make sense of our world and organize and compare. We're always just trying to make piles of things and categorize things and name things, and that's good. As a creature, it's good for us to try to make sense of our world and categorize it. And there are five, give or take, different ways that we can think of conceptually categorizing data. Location, preaching to the choir, we all understand how important location is in understanding the world and this information architecture. Location is key. I would say the best one, of course. So would you. There's alphabet. You can look something up in a glossary or an index or a phone book. Remember phone books? Time, of course. Time is very intuitive to our human experience. We perceive it as linearly from A to B, but according to the laws of physics, the best that they can say, there's no real reason it has to be unidirectional. It could go both ways, but we perceive it as only going one way. Category, so categorical, grouping things by category, and then hierarchical. So kind of like a parent, child, grandchild sort of nested relationship. These are five ways that we can parse data and make sense of it. If you want to learn more about Latch, actually, David Glassett gave a really good presentation at this past year's virtual NASIS. We're all virtual now, which is got its pros and its cons and can be a blessing because we can all see David Glassett give his presentation at NASIS instead of flying there. So check that out if you're interested in this kind of information architecture and how it applies to geography and GIS. So we got this data. What are we working with? Well, Keith Van Grafflin, a colleague of mine, took all this historic data, all these CSV files, and he used the big data connection tool in ArcGIS Pro, and he pointed it to his file folder and said, here's all the data. And the big data connection tool consumed all of that and aggregated it into this monster feature service that, it's all in one place. And he also ran a tool that connected the breadcrumbs of all those points. So instead of point data, blip, 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 it actually smartly draws a line to show you this vessel path. And the vessel path is really sinuous and precise and beautiful, really. But when I look at this, which is just an information product, actually, this is more like a data product because I'm not getting a whole lot of information out of it, except that, wow, there's a lot of stuff happening here, right? This is a data product or an information product, but it needs a little bit of help. So let's look at the concept of latch. And we've got location, we've got time, and we've got category. If we can just chunk that data out by these three dimensions, then I think it can be a lot more easily navigated and visually understood, and that kind of thing. So that's what we did. So again, in collaboration with my colleague, Keith Van Grafflin and Jinan Zhang, we built this application for Living Atlas. And it takes all those points for the United States, in and around the United States, and it just lays them out there. And it goes back a few years, and it'll go back even more years, and it'll be updated in an ongoing fashion. And we're presenting these things categorically too. You can choose cargo, fishing, military, whatever, and by time. So you can walk through time and see the changes that may or may not be happening. By the way, there's the URL for that. I will say it's pretty demanding on the browser. There's a lot of data. So, and we're working to optimize that. So if it crashes, I'm sorry, we're trying. It'll get better and better. So here you are up in Memphis, and I've got cargo activated. So these are cargo vessels, and you can see they're winding their way up the Mississippi. But they can only go so far. Cargo vessels are too big, and their draft is too massive to go very far up the Mississippi River. It gets to a certain spot, and then it has to hand off to something smaller and lighter. Same for tankers. Tankers are huge. This oil and gas and petroleum is just this massive infrastructure that floats. and it can only go so far. And you get this neat kind of handoff that happens. If we go up to Memphis, we can see how it's living, right? You've got this active, buzzing community of tow and tug vessels. So it's like a handoff, like a baton in a race. You know, vessels get a certain distance, and then the tows and tugs are like, "Well, I'll take it from here," and it goes all the way up. Up to Minneapolis, for crying out loud. And it's just this beautiful ecosystem of things moving up and down this river system. Now, here's passenger, which is kind of interesting. You get this very small blip connecting these two urban areas. You've got Memphis there. What's the city on the other side of the river? Somebody shout it out. I don't know it.
It's West Memphis.
West Memphis.
West Memphis,
Arkansas.
West Memphis, Arkansas. Okay, great. I guess I could have guessed that one. That may be my first guess. Interesting. So this is passenger service, just taking people from one area to the other. And if I click it, almost all of this traffic happens to be the Memphis Crew Boat 2. Has anyone ever actually been on the Memphis Crew Boat 2? Okay, well, it's there. And then other, right? Other is a catch-all category. Everything else. And there's lots of everything else happening here. And so I was exploring this data around your lovely city, and a lot of it is police. So Memphis Police Department boats going up and down the river, checking things out. Coast Guard had some data there. Pretty interesting. Now, what I like about this data is it's this beautiful, bizarre mix of planned structure and just the Wild West. You've got vessels going where they need to go and vessels going, screw it, I'm going this way. And it's like this beautiful tangle of order and structure. And there's a weird balance there. And it's interesting to look through and ask questions of. So this is Michigan State University, which is just a few miles down the road from me. And if you look at this, this looks like, look at those sidewalks, right? Very haphazard, this was not laid out by a planner and an architect. These are called desire lines. This is kids going from A to B, and by golly, they're going to walk through the woods or across the quad, and they're going to walk on the grass because who cares? Grass is nice to walk on. You don't tell a college kid where not to walk. They're going to walk there in spite of you. These are called desire lines. And let's take a look at University of Memphis. Here's the University of Memphis tilted sideways. This is the most recent imagery that we've got in the base map. Unfortunately, it's a little blurry. It makes me want to like wipe the sunscreen out of my eyes a little bit. But here we are in Wayback. World Imagery Wayback is an app in Living Atlas where you aren't stuck with the current version of the World Imagery base map. You can look at previous iterations that have been released and maybe you find something that suits you a little bit better. So here's an older version. I don't think a whole lot has changed by way of desire lines and sidewalks at the University of Memphis since 2014, but there's that beautiful campus. Look at all those desire lines. This was not laid out by a planner. This is a natural, organic, intuitive walking plan that was created by the masses in an emergent sense, not in a planned sense. And what do you do with these things? You can be passive aggressive and spiteful and say, by golly, I gave you a rigid network of sidewalks and you're going to use them, for crying out loud. Or maybe there are reasons why you don't want people to walk there. Maybe there's quicksand right there and you don't want them to hit it. Or maybe there's a pod of right whales to go through this area and you want to mark that off, right, for the safety of either the environment or the traveler themselves. But a lot of places will just take that cue and say, okay, this is the wisdom of the crowd and we should institutionalize this wisdom and create structure from it. So if you look at these sidewalks, these are pretty haphazard as well, but they've been bricked over and institutionalized and said, yes, these are now officially the sidewalks. You guys chose where you wanted to walk, and now we're going to make it a little bit easier for you, which is pretty cool and interesting. And when I look at big vessel data like this, I think, is it more emergent, like this flock of birds kind of going where it wills? Is this big mass of the semi-intelligent thing coming and going, or is it this rigid structure of rules and order? And I mean, it's both things. It's both things at the same time, right? Is that feather on, it's the feather has a destiny. It's going to land on Forrest Gump's shoulder or shoe or whatever. But it also floats accidental like on the breeze. And there's some beauty and elegance to this vessel traffic data. I mean, check this out. So you got chaos, right? This is chaos. It's a spider web on cocaine. And it's just all over the place. You get these crazy little weird blips and clusters, but also you get these patterns of structure that are pretty interesting. Anytime as a scientist and you're looking at data, you see structure in something, that's when you take note, right? That's kind of what we're doing. We're blowing off the dust of data and trying to find structure. And then you can ask, what is this structure? And, why is it here? Um, in this case, I mean, you've got a lot going on, but you've got these interesting patterns that are happening. What are these? Um, and in most cases, these are vessels running survey. They could be doing soundings or radar or bathymetry scan for undersea mapping, perhaps for oil and gas exploration. Very tight network of a vessel just going back and forth, covering an area. Can you guys hear my kids screaming in the background? Is my mic picking that up? This is the age of COVID, my friends. We're all working from home. It's a great equalizer. We all get to see and hear each other's families. I like that, by the way. Um, Here's another one, very tight circles and some very big circles. Sometimes with these kinds of things, you can get a sense for if the sensing equipment is on the boat itself and they can make tight turns, or if they're perhaps towing a device behind them, torpedo like, and they have to make kind of wider turns. That reveals itself in these structures. You can see here it's almost like a paperclip. It's very wide, so they're probably towing some kind of survey device, or doing a marine inventory to plan what sort of fishing season should be allowed for upcoming years, which is all kind of interesting stuff. And if you click on any of these, um, you can see what vessel it was, and just click the little magnifying glass, and it'll automatically launch a website or a Google search for that. And I think in that case, this was contracted to do a seafloor survey, which is kind of fun. So the difference in vessel traffic and traffic is a car can only drive really on a road, and it's stuck on this pre-existing infrastructure of roads. But boats, where they're going, they don't need roads. They can go anywhere. And when you look at the data, you get this interesting combination. But this looks very ordered and very structured, right? This looks like a highway. And if you turn on the nautical boundaries reference, it turns out it is a highway. You've got a traffic separation scheme for these big cargo vessels. These things are massive, you guys. I mean, you can all picture that crazy boat that was stuck a little while ago. These things are the size of a small city, and they float. They don't turn quickly, and so you have these rules set up for them. This is a incoming, outgoing, westward bound, eastward bound. You've got a lot of rules and speed requirements when they start coming together, and everybody's like, "Come on, let's do this." And then just free for all at the end, where it's a separation that happens. Um, they need plan, and they need order, and they need structure, of course. Um, and what does that even look like? And why? Because it's the ocean. Well, some places have right whale restriction areas, and you just straight up can't go there if you're a certain type of vessel, to protect the marine environment there. Speed, reduced speed areas to make less of an impact on the natural environment. So it's this kind of interesting combination of order and chaos. So order here, and then when you hit the more open ocean, then it's chaos. Then everybody kind of scatters and goes to all parts of the world. Now, there's something kind of interesting happening here. It looks a little bit chaotic, but what's going on with this cluster to the south? They leave port, and these boats are headed south, and then they just stop and they chill out for a while, and they sit there. Anybody have an idea of what they're doing? This is passenger category of traffic. I don't mind if you shout an answer. If not, I'll just tell you what it is. If you turn on the nautical boundary reference, right? Okay, this is interesting. There's a line there, and turns out that's a border, international waters. What are they doing right on the other side of international waters? Well, anytime there's a boundary, there's also an opportunity to experience what happens beyond that boundary, right? So this is the flow uh, going around the gate. And it turns out if I select this, it's the Big M Casino. It's a casino boat. You go a certain distance, it's okay to gamble. So, if somebody rings a bell, all right, guys, start pumping those quarters. Let's do this. And then they head back. Another thing that I think is interesting is you can see a phenomenon in this data that really you just would have a hard time seeing otherwise. Maybe it's a broad, slowly moving phenomenon, or maybe it's even epidemiology. How's epidemiology echoed in vessel data? Well, it is. So here is a few years of um, passenger traffic around Juneau, Alaska. So Juneau, the capital of Alaska, also my son's name, Juneau Nelson, um, is not accessible by car. You can only fly in or get there by boat. And so the network of passenger vessels is extremely important in this area. And there's an international boundary not too far away as well. And so it's just this massive amount of traffic happening almost all the time. And you can see 2017, 2018, 2019, and then boom, virtually nothing in 2020, except for very minimal supply runs across the water there because of the lockdowns that have happened because of COVID. You can see something as complex as epidemiology and national policies echoed in boat breadcrumbs. There's something interesting about that. Now, also something kind of sad, right? I mean, if we look at this pattern, we're looking at Tampa Bay and St. Pete and Tampa in Florida. And you see this very regimented path of passenger traffic coming in, but then you see these kind of circles outside in the deeper water, and it turns out that these are um, these are cruise ships who are stuck, and this time is when um, the virus was starting to be detected, and nobody really knew what to do. There wasn't a plan. You've got these cruise ships with hundreds of people on board. Many of them are infected. That was the early thing we were looking at. Do you remember that? Recall that? The cruise ship situation. What do we do with these people? They're coming into our city. Do you let them come into port? We don't know. And so what happened, sadly, was you had these vessels filled with hundreds and thousands of folks just doing circles, waiting for instructions. What do we do? And you can see that phenomenon echoed here in this data. Now, other circles, these are different kinds of circles. And this is something that pops up pretty frequently. If you turn on the tanker option, you look at these strange circular half moon pock marks in the traffic. What is going on? You see it everywhere, especially here off of I think this is outside of Houston near Galveston. All these circular rings, and what's going on? Well, um, you have to wait in line. Ports are really busy places. Here's an amusement park and everybody wants to get on. Maybe more appropriately is the DMV. You need to do your thing and you got to wait. Wait here. Here's your number. Remember flying? Do you remember airports? What that was like? Oh my goodness. I almost miss taking my shoes off and putting them in a plastic bin. It's been so long. Um, these are anchorage areas for tankers while they wait their turn for a berth at port. It's a busy place and you got to wait in line. And they have designated areas where these massive tankers sit there and idle, and they're swinging on their anchor, which is why you have that strange circular pattern at that scale. Here they are near Los Angeles, San Francisco. Now, something like this is interesting because you've got typically very nearby a very dense human population. A lot of people are living right there, right next to this nonstop parking lot of small floating cities idling their diesel engines. Lud, 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 lud. And this is something to consider for air quality measurements and public health questions. Um, Something that you wouldn't necessarily think of if you weren't pulling in oceanic data too, right? You don't necessarily think of that as a first order cause of breathing issues and a source of pollution. But also there's environmental concerns too. I mean, here's an Anchorage area with boats just waiting in their queue. And this is near a very at-risk seagrass area. So a very important ecosystem, and where a lot of shellfish is raised nearby here too. So these are things to consider, and you start connecting dots when you think of where something is happening and what's happening there. You can start extrapolating more and asking better questions. So here's Glacier, and here is I think it's Portage Glacier near Valdez, Alaska. And here it is again. I'm backing way back, and we're working our way through time. Here's 2014, 2015, 19. Look at the difference in that glacier just in a couple of years, right? It's pretty radical, such that the traffic for tourist boats that leave out of the Port of Valdez and swing around that peninsula and go check out the glacier. I've been on this, by the way, a couple times, and when you get close, they brush right up against that glacier, and like it's calving, and everybody's like, "Woo, yeah, it's calving!" And they scoop out ice, and and the kids kick it around on the deck like soccer balls, like in Titanic. Remember that? Those guys kicking this ice and Titanic on the deck. Come on, guys, you're about to die. Anyways, people don't die and sink when they look at Portage Glacier, Columbia Glacier. I'm sorry, it's not Portage Glacier, it's Columbia Glacier. But you can see, look at those lines. Already in 2017, the boats are further in than the underlying satellite imagery is showing me is the boundary of that glacier. That's kind of interesting. So we've got data that's collected at a different temporal rate than its frame of reference. 2018, it goes even deeper into what looks like it would be glacier. 2019, and then just a trickle in 2020 because traffic obviously was down because of coronavirus. But you can see how deeply it's gone in right there. There's a line. So a base map from 2017 to 2020, you can see the change in something. So this is one bit of data giving evidence about something else that you might not have as frequently collected data about. Do you know what I mean? You've got something like boat data giving you an indication about glacier changes. That's crazy. So I was talking about boats not being able to go all the way up the river there, and its cargo can't make it very far. It gets a certain spot and then it's got to hand it off. So does tanker traffic, tanker and cargo. But look what happens for tow. Tow and tugs are the workhorse of the seas in our river systems. And it's this kind of glorious handoff and exchange, this relationship between these vessel types that happens. And tugs and tows can go anywhere. It's this neat illustration of this handoff of this chain of custody of items as they get to where they need to go. Right? You've probably all seen something like this. Maybe a lot of you can look out your window and see something like this right now. And these are all over the place. And they beautifully and exquisitely trace our coastal and inland water systems. I just like looking at it, to tell you the truth. So here is tow traffic at the Straits of Mackinac. I'm from Michigan. I live in Michigan. I work in Michigan. I work in a woodshed in my yard here in Michigan. And my father lives right there where those two pieces of land almost touch each other, but they don't quite. And there's a 5-mile bridge that connects them. And this is a very busy and important shipping network that connects Chicago and everybody else, with the Eastern Seaboard, all that traffic coming up the St. Lawrence Seaway from the Atlantic Ocean. Really important. It's you can stand you can stand in the yard and just watch these big tankers make their way through. But nature rules supreme, right? And so when it's locked in, which sometimes it is, nobody moves and everybody waits. And you see them waiting. Sometimes you see them backing up and gaining speed and trying to charge through the ice and break it up, which is what was happening when I took this picture. You can't see it. It's amazing, but nature wins. Nature finds a way. And so sometimes that very dense amount of traffic slows down to nothing. Now, again, sometimes this data can show you something about a completely different phenomenon. So phenomenon A is fishing boats, and phenomenon B is the undersea, the invisible, otherwise invisible undersea ridge that happens just off the coast of Delaware here. If I didn't have any bathymetry information, you could almost perfectly trace the cusp of this edge, where the ocean plateaus and then sinks down into a deeper abyss. It's one point of data just magically tracing out with like this beautiful pencil another bit of data that we can't see. And similarly, here it is on the west coast coming out of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and I was told they're fishing for salmon in this case, and that's why there's a spike in the spring and in the fall, and the salmon are, doing their thing. I guess that's when it's a good idea to go look for them. And so you see these fishing vessels just perfectly tracing out the contour of this shift in elevation, revealing to us really complex undersea bathymetry on the surface of the ocean, looking for fish. They're just looking for fish. But we also see this sense of seasonal change. And yes, it is fishing data, but really it's the data of our 23.5 degree axial tilt on the, in our orbital plane with the sun. We're tilted like this, which means we have seasons. The direct rays of the sun are up here, then they're in the middle, and then they're down in the southern hemisphere. The sons of guns, come on back to the northern hemisphere, direct rays of the sun. It's on its way. So you have seasons, you have this heat exchange, you have this dance of energy from north to south that happens every year. And it's reflected in fishing data, And so we think we're collecting information about phenomena A, but it's this deep underlying phenomena that it's giving us clues about, which I think is pretty wonderful. You've got this seasonal dance of cold and warm and cold and warm, and it gives us this slightly more realistic model of our Earth, a little bit more understanding. And that's all we're after. We're not trying to answer all the questions. What we're doing is using science to help us refine our understanding of the world and ask better questions of it. And armed with a little bit better understanding each time, we can go back to our models and improve it and know which data to collect and know where to focus our efforts and know what sorts of questions to ask next. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, John. If anybody has any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself or raise your hand. Yeah, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or you can type it in the chat box if you do not feel comfortable unmuting yourself.
Let's see, chat. There we go. Ooh, I can see the chat too now.
Yeah, I see we have one person with their hand raised, but maybe she's or he or she is typing in the chat. I guess while we're waiting for that, I have a quick question, John. You mentioned that y'all created those lines using a tool I had not used before in Arc Pro. I think you said it was a big data something tool.
Yes, the big data connection tool. So I can tell you what it's called. It's a combination of two tools. So I'll open our blog. I linked to it in a blog post I authored with Keith Van Grafflin. See if we can get this. examples.
So I'm guessing the tool has a way to recognize that a whole bunch of points represent the same vessel, and then it can use like the dates or date timestamp to connect them in the correct sequence.
That's right. So it uses a categorical attribute. So in that case, it would be me as a user. I would identify the unique ID that each vessel has as the common linkage that they should be connected to each other. And then we would define the ordering with the date time stamp exactly. And then the combination of those two bits of information plus geography, so the three circles I showed you, gives you these breadcrumbs, or the trails that are created from the breadcrumbs. Let's see the names of those tools. Oh, by golly, I thought I had it. Oh, I do. I'm a dirty liar. Yep, sorry. The big data connection tool, and then I'll follow up with you on the second tool that did the connection of drawing lines out of all of those dots.
Thank you, John. This is Lakri. This was my question too. I don't know if you can hear me, but
Yeah, hi.
I was interested. I was interested in that, and I put my video, but I don't see myself. So anyway,
I can see you.
Okay. So at the district, the Saltwater Water Management District, we have an application that someone wrote in Python to connect all these dots to create a line for all this small boats, airboats, or all kinds of boats that they go out and they do spray to manage the vegetation. So the information that's in the Living Atlas for other, do you think they collect data for all kinds of living boats that have that transponder, or we should? I wonder if we are duplicating the effort that was already done.
Well, if it has an AIS transponder, which
right,
then it would appear in the data. Now, not all vessels keep their AIS transponder on all the time. You know, sometimes you want to, switch it off for whatever reason.
Right.
Or sometimes it's a vessel that, for whatever reason, just doesn't have a transponder on board at that point. But most of them do. And if it's pinging its AIS signal, then it would appear in this data. But I don't presume to suggest that you throw away your efforts. You've got a good system in place. It sounds like that's working and collecting and reliable. So I wouldn't want you to replace that or anything. But yeah, the other category, which actually I can just open this up. The other category is a big catch-all. And
I was looking to find out what tools in Pro you're doing to connect the dots.
So I'll send Michelle and Rob an email update with some information about the tools that we used. It was Keith Van Graflin's the smart guy. He's an oceanographer, and he's really wonderful with data. And he was the one that did all of this pre-processing. And
right. I'm surprised they have the military boats showing on this application.
Yeah, well, I think it's just when they decide to turn the switch on and log their location, that's when we see it.
So thank you very much. Very, very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hey, John, we have a question in the chat from Aisha. She said, not sure if it was mentioned at the start, but is the shipping data available as open source online?
You can download this data. I neglected to mention that. So one of the reasons that this application exists is to make this data more accessible to users to download, instead of downloading a 1 gigabyte CSV file for a day and then figuring out which ones you need and doing it. There's an option called download options, and you can choose inland electronic charts and make a selection, and this will be 911 megabytes for the full span of time for the lower Mississippi area, all vessel types. And it just makes it neatly available, parsed out for you to download. That data is still available in its raw form. Let me see right here, marine cadastre. So marinecadastre.gov/AIS or /AIS. This is where you can download the open source raw CSV files. So you can go right to the source, or you can optionally download, or both, download the lines that we've made available. Oh yeah, Joseph Carpenter pasted the link. Thanks, Joseph.
Hey, Joseph, we can't hear you.
I switched off my mic for double redundancy, and now I have egg on my face. Hi, John. First time, long time. Love the nautical mapping. I've been showing it to some of my colleagues, and they're very into it.
Oh, great.
I lead a team of spatial analytics consultants, and I'm wondering, for us mere mortals who don't have Arcgis Enterprise and are using Pro on a localized instance, what on the scale of 0 to blue smoke coming out of the computer, how do you think we might fare running some of the workflows like this with this scale of data on localized machines?
Yeah, well, I'm not super savvy with IT kinds of things, but I know that Keith has, just a desktop machine, and that's what he did. So any data that you're seeing here is the result of Keith with his own machine at his house, downloading all of those CSV files and opening Pro and running those tools.
Well, that's very heartening. Thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not a blink of an eye. I imagine it took him some number of hours for it to run. Maybe he let it run overnight. I don't know. But
Sure.
In the future, we're going to collaborate on a third blog post. We've released 2 blog posts about this. The first one just announcing it, saying what it is and what it's good for. The second one showing some examples, interesting examples, kind of like what I did today. And then the third one will be more in the guts of how it was built, the tools used to pre-process the data, the JavaScript API tweaks used to present this user experience, that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Pirates never turn on the AIS receivers for some reason, which I think is rude. I think pirate data would be so fascinating and interesting, and it's selfish and it's rude that they never turn on their receivers.
They just need a lag, like a Twitch streamer. Put on like a 48-hour lag.
This whole concept of vessel traffic and positioning is interesting because there are weapons being developed that will spoof a position and so it'll spoof a GIS location for GIS receivers. We see data that show that that'll kind of offset the position of something, and the vessel itself will think it's somewhere else, and it'll end up colliding with another vessel or the land or something. And so it's weird. It's crazy. Information is powerful, of course, and especially if you can trick somebody into believing information. I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, we were talking about pirates, right? Yeah. It would also be interesting to pull in instances of piracy in a global application. This is based in the United States because of marine cadastre making this data so ingestible for us. But on a global scale, it would be interesting to see this data in the context of piracy data. We've done some work with piracy data to see when day of week trends are, when does it spike, seasonal trends, and then overall trends. Actually,
This is Luckry. That was the event few years ago, right, with the piracy, that they were attacking big
Yeah.
ships.
Well, they've been doing it for a couple thousand years, but it's interesting now that we've got data. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency requests people to fill out a form when there's been a piracy incident, and they make that data available for folks to plan, paths, or maybe you want to avoid this area at a certain year, or I'm sorry, month, something like that. And I've done some analysis, some time-based analysis on that data over a 40-year chunk of data. So it's a pretty big bite of data. You can start parsing it in interesting ways, specifically time. You can animate it through time in a linear sense to see when there's an uptick. The 2008 was a big year for pirates. The global economy got hit pretty hard, and people went to plan B, which in a lot of instances was piracy. And you do what you do. And this kind of walks through some of those temporal instances. You can see when it hits 2008, this area really light up. Somalia, off the coast of Somalia. And it's actually gone down pretty drastically in recent years, which is interesting. But it's a market like any other. It just happens to be a black market. And different areas will increase. This area here, kind of near Null Island, Null Island, lat long 00. This area here has kind of increased in activity in the last decade or so.
Well, your time sequence stops at 2019. I've heard that in 2020, anecdotally, I've heard it really increased again.
I haven't checked since then, so that would actually be very interesting to go back and look. Agree. Yeah, and there's seasonality too. You wouldn't necessarily think so much, especially because it's in the mid latitudes and the seasonal variance is minimal. You might have monsoon season, of course, but it does have an impact. But anyway,
So I recognize the Firefly theme here. Is the marine cargo also just very fine strands of Firefly, or do you recall what theme you used for that?
Sure. Let me open the app itself. I'll turn off the download options, and I'll do other. I'll zoom into the Memphis area. So right now it's all kind of coalescing, but in reality, each of these is a very fine sub-pixel line of, I think, 2% opacity. So it takes a lot of lines to stack up to make a fully solid white line. And each of these is a discrete path that you can select and get information about. And the reason it has this kind of neat glowing effect, which is more obvious when I choose tow because it's colorized. This is a feature of ArcGIS JavaScript API called Bloom. So it's a visual filter that you can apply called Bloom. And I mean, I wish they'd called it Firefly because I'm biased, but the effectively the result is it's a Firefly effect. It takes a discrete thing and it gives it kind of a tapered edge glow effect. So
and is that
the Bloom effect.
Is there a similar effect in the layer blending that got added in Pro, or is that would you say that's unrelated?
There is not. There's no effect in Pro that will just Firefly something. However, I do have a few resources that will show you how to create a Firefly effect directly in Pro. ArcGIS Online has a Firefly category of symbols. So if you have a point layer, you can choose a Firefly symbol in ArcGIS Online, which actually the beta viewer is out of beta today. So last night it became official. So that's kind of neat. So now if you go to ArcGIS Online and fire up a map, by default, it will now start in what used to be the beta viewer. But yeah, I lost my can't get a new tab. The menu's in the way.
And John, the base map you're using, it's available already, right? Not just online, or it's something you created with the blue
This base map
shade?
is, yeah, this is a custom base map. It's a combination of our world imagery base map and we used blend modes on it. It's a blue background, and then we used I believe a luminosity blend mode on the imagery base map. And then on top of that, I chose for labels, we stole the label tiles from the ocean base map. And it looks like this because of blend modes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Maybe you should share it with the entire public.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Let me-
Everything you do, I watch. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, if you're interested in seeing how to make a colorized base map, it's pretty straightforward to do in ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online. So here's any base map, and then I walk through in this YouTube video how to make it a monochrome base map or a colorized monochrome base map in whatever color you want. So you can totally do that, and it's really fun and straightforward. And another video I was going to share with you was Firefly Symbols. So here's how to make Firefly symbols from scratch in ArcGIS Pro, just by making it a glowing symbol, no images or tricks or anything. So check those videos out if that sounds interesting. My channel is John Nelson Maps. Yeah, lots of how-tos. It's fun.
All right, so we have about 4 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, please speak up now or type them in the chat box.
Or forever hold your peace. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Joseph, for sharing all those links. That's cool.
I use the Firefly style that you posted constantly, all the time. All of
Oh,
us
good.
do. So
Oh, thanks. That's
thank
an
you for
honor.
your service.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Well, I have to say, it's an honor to be asked to chat with you all. I've had a good time, and I dream of the day where I can visit Memphis. And if I'm headed that way, I'll send your organizers a note, and maybe I can.
Well, John, we have
visit
our
some GIS
conference
folks.
in November, so if you would like to attend,
Oh, cool.
if it's safe by then, you should drop by in November for our
Is it the
GIS
Magic
Day conference. Yep.
conference? Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's scheduled for November 18th and 19th. It'll be our 20th annual conference.
Oh, cool.
And it's at the Memphis Botanic Garden. We actually didn't have a conference last year, so I guess it's not annual anymore.
Yeah, I know. I miss my local Michigan GIS conference.
All right, any last questions? All right, well, thank you, John, for joining us. It was really great getting to hear from you and to learn all of this. And I'm really looking forward to going and watching all of your videos on YouTube.
It's all billable hours. Bill those hours. It's GIS related.
Yes,
Well,
thank
thanks
you so
again.
much,
Thanks
John.
for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
John. And all right, y'all. Thank you all for attending. And don't forget to turn in your map gallery submission.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.